Obsession. A true story. The unfolding of a very complex process of obsession, with its main roots planted deep in the mysterious soil of past incarnations, with many implications projected into the future of those involved.
Welcome, dear friends, to another study session of the book Obsession, dictated by the spirit of Manuel Filomena de Miranda through the blessed mediumship of Divaldo Pereira Franco. Today we thank our Creator for the opportunity that He gives us to bring the love of Christ closer and closer to our hearts. We thank the Master for having clothed Himself with a physical body and have lived amongst us during our daily lives, carrying out our daily chores, and most especially, we thank our Master for the teachings of His heart, and particularly for His constant dialogue with the heart of the Creator. Oftentimes, in the Spiritist books that we have had the opportunity to study, including this particular one, we see that prayer is a constant opportunity that is given to us to connect with our true selves, our souls, and the Creator above. We also realize through prayer and through reasoned faith that the love of the Creator through our Master Jesus is ever more available and abundantly present to each and every one of us. Thank you, loving Creator, loving Father, for having provided us with all the resources we need to live through your love, by your love, and with your love in every aspect of our lives. So be it. Let us now enjoy the reading of chapter 14, where we will see the true outcomes of loving prayers in our daily lives. Enjoy.
Chapter 14. New Ways. In order to preserve the body from illness, we invigorate it. In order to prevent obsession, the soul must be fortified. Thence the necessity for the obsessed to work hard to improve himself, which is most of the time enough to set him free from the obsessor without any help from others. Outside help is needed when obsession turns itself into subjugation and possession, because then the patient often loses control over his own will and self-determination. Genesis chapter 14, item 46. The Santa Marias were now finding illumination and spiritual comfort in Allan Kardec's books, thanks to the guiding hands of Colonel Sobrera, who volunteered adequate explanations and suggested suitable reading. Encouraged by his devoted friend, Esther's father engaged himself in a systematic study of Spiritism and started his own home prayer meeting as the first step towards his spiritual renewal, since they had decided to try spiritual therapy on the sick girl. Donna Margarita had begun to feel unfamiliar inner emotions ever since she heard Sobrera's advice. From a state of permanent anxiety that oppressed her, she began to feel hopeful and optimistic, perhaps anticipating joys which had long become a thing of the past. Stimulated by edifying conversations and the coming inauguration of the home meeting, she decided to decorate her home festively so as to change the gloomy appearance of the house long immersed in the shadows of sadness. She got out her precious vases, made beautiful flower arrangements, and chose a delicately embroidered tablecloth to cover the dinner table. The dining room, which had been closed for some time, would be open for the occasion, and she could not help feeling happy in her expectations. Because of this new disposition, she could absorb invigorating energy from the vibrations of her spirit guides, who were also happy about her new turn in the family. On the first day of the first meeting, the Sobreras arrived at 7:30, bringing along Lieutenant Colonel Joel and 3 other friends whom he introduced to his host. "Please excuse my bringing a few friends along," said Sobrera to his friend. "They belong to our Francis of Assisi and are also concerned in Esther's recovery." "You have nothing to apologize for," answered Colonel Santamaria. "My house is yours, and we're honored to receive your friends. Constancio, I want you to meet Dr. and Mrs. Gilvan de Albuquerque," Sobrera introduced. "He is a devoted physician living in Botafogo. And this is Rosangela. She lives with the Albuquerques and works as an assistant nurse at the Praia Vermelha Hospital." The host couldn't hide his surprise at the sight of Rosangela. He instantly remembered the painful episode of their previous meeting, when she had gone to him out of pure desire to help his daughter, and he had treated her most unkindly. It seemed to him that God wanted to grant him the chance to apologize for his rude behavior, which had been the consequences of unjustified animosity against Spiritism. "Indeed, the Lord comes to my house tonight," he said, "because he gives me the opportunity to apologize to this young lady for my most rude and unkind behavior towards her right here in this house some time ago." He turned to Rosangela. "I'm sure your religion is a noble one, since it leads you to spontaneous forgiveness and sends you back to this home, which from now on I beg you to consider as your own." The altered tone of his voice betrayed his emotion. "It is me who should ask your forgiveness, Colonel," answered the girl, slightly embarrassed. "I acted most foolishly and impulsively." They shook hands fraternally. Donna Margarita led the entire party into the living room, where they sat down and started a pleasant, informal, and edifying conversation. At 8 o'clock, Colonel Sobrera asked permission to start the meeting. The group was invited into the dining room, where they sat around the dinner table. Sobrera had brought a copy of the Gospel According to Spiritism by Allan Kardec. The worn appearance of the book told of the constant handling by the dedicated servant of Christ's truth. He always plunged through it, immersed in deep meditation. They asked Joel to offer the initial prayer. Joel then asked God's blessing for themselves, for the home that they were received in, and for the sick girl in particular. He said the girl's name so delicately that the vibration in his voice produced a surge of emotion that shook her parents' hearts and spread around, translating the superior purpose that gathered them there, the wish to serve. Peaceful vibrations began to pervade the home atmosphere, penetrating into their hearts and souls, uniting them in pure spiritual love. A natural silence followed. Guided by the invisible hand of the spirit mentor, Colonel Sobrera opened the book and read from chapter 2, "To love thy neighbor as thyself," the spirit messages dictated by Emmanuel and Pascal, entitled Selfishness. The reading over, Colonel Sobrera, clearly inspired, said, "Our spirit friends have guided us into a very important subject, for selfishness is indeed the major cause of innumerable moral disasters and suffering. If men would understand their weaknesses and limitations, they would feel the need to help one another, and the earth would benefit from a different spiritual atmosphere. But because of defective social formation and misdirected moral education, pernicious feelings are cultivated instead of the higher impulses of a noble life. This reinforces human passions, which are then released in the many competitive life games, where the best is not always the worthiest. Thus, men go from one inferior emotion to another along the different phases of material life, childhood, youth, and maturity to old age, developing an insatiable avarice because of the predominance of grosser instincts. Parents push their children into success at any cost, arousing in them the taste for selfishness instead of preparing them properly for life. They think of their children as the future masters of the earth, regardless of the means they might employ to achieve such goals. In short, they forget to prepare their children to lead a decent life, whatever the circumstances, and neglect to teach them to acquire self-control before they try to control their fellow men. He stopped and became thoughtful for a while. Then he went on. Like little puppets manipulated by lenient parents, children spend childhood without proper discipline, developing the negative side of their personalities with no regard for the moral and spiritual standards which, if considered, would help them to fulfill the redeeming tasks for which they have reincarnated. But selfishness is their chief characteristic. Like an all-powerful wave, it rises, falls, and rises again, assuming countless expressions as a devastating monster riding the suffering humanity of today. Jealousy, envy, revolt, avarice, lust, and hatred are some of the ugly faces of this many-faced enemy hidden within us. Many times we reincarnate to conquer it, and nearly always we repeat the very same mistakes, deceived by its many disguises. Were we to exercise fraternity and love as Jesus taught us to do, we would be in a completely different position on this planet. The speaker, whose lecture was clearly inspired by a superior mind, made a short pause soon to continue the edifying lesson. Unfortunately, he resumed, selfishness plagues the earth, and it has adhered so strongly to the spirit's inner aspirations that it holds on to them even after they've passed into the spirit world. Once there, pressed by disappointment, revolt sets in, conscience questions them, and they plunge into acute suffering which racks and wears them out. Nursing resentment and revolt, these entities claim rights and considerations they do not deserve, and transfer to others the responsibility for their personal errors. Such is the appropriate background for the setting of pernicious obsessions, and the incarnates who fall victims of obsession, instead of raising their vibrations through prayer, meditation, and patience, on the contrary, because they also cherish hatred, despair, and wounded vanity, they tune in with the troubled entities, cementing strong ties with the darkness. The obsessive ties may last indefinitely unless the contenders arm themselves with love. Unfortunately, nobody seems to be ready to serve, but many of us do our best to be or look worse than we are, to fight fiercely and to hold on to inferior mental and moral positions. But if we let in the light of Christ, who is never indifferent, he'd help the adulteress and the criminal, giving all the opportunity for rehabilitation. We will change contingencies and alter situations, preparing the world for the great tomorrow. When we are hurt, it means divine law is doing us justice. We may be suffering within a context where we don't owe anything now, but as it is, we are paying for many old debts to the law. So we must not consider ourselves unlucky or innocent victims. Let's be patient and humble then. Patience and humility are great weapons against selfishness. Jesus will do for us whatever lies beyond our reach. He stopped talking to find everybody immersed in deep meditation. The participants were invited to comment on the topic, and each one offered his contribution. Finally, it was the host's turn. "I've been a worshiper of selfishness," he said a little awkwardly, "and I've been a victim of myself. I've been propped up in my empty pride, which I now am compelled to scrutinize through a purging process." He made a short pause, then went on. "Concerning the Spiritist revelation or my daughter's illness, I must say that I never really doubted God's existence. Unfortunately, however, I was used to consider myself as a great worthy person. Frustrated and revolted, I acted against him. I can see now how insignificant I am, and I realize how selfishness can disguise itself so as to conquer and rule over us. Now that I come to know about spiritual values, I can already see a light gleaming, despite my still great ignorance of the subject." His voice trembled, and Donna Margarita's eyes filled with tears. After another short pause, he continued, "I've been tormented by conflicting emotions concerning my daughter. I feel that what really ails me is not only Esther's problem, but rather a mixture of self-pity, disappointment, and a feeling of injustice. Love and anger, compassion and revolt were the alternate feelings which bowed me down like an insufferable burden. Now I begin to see differently. I understand that past connections keep us tied together, forcing us to cast off chains of selfishness. After Sobrera's first explanations about Spiritism, my obstinate selfishness still expected Esther's cure to be accomplished without much effort on my part. I had resorted to the simplistic and uncompromising way of doing things. The more I read and meditate, the more I understand. I want my daughter cured, of course, but now I'm aware of my own spiritual needs. And I realize that I'm even sicker than she is, for she's only sick in the mind while I'm loaded down with spiritual diseases which cause hers and other likewise insidious and harmful disturbances. He fell silent for a few minutes, then exclaimed, like the blind man from Jericho, I can also say, now I can see. It had been a long, painful confession, but he still added, May the Lord forgive us, my wife and myself. We've been walking around in circles of agony, and may you, our friends, excuse our ignorance and help us with your friendship and fraternal understanding. Donna Margarita rose and put her arms around her husband and kissed his forehead. Her spontaneous gesture comforted him. Colonel Sobrera prepared to end the meeting. He invited everybody to pray on behalf of all the needy and asked Joel to give passes to each of them. It had taken them only an hour, but another home had opened its doors to the communion with the spirit world in full accordance with the evangelical teachings. The meeting over, they engaged in cheerful conversation while the hostess offered her guests cookies and refreshments. The visitors departed, leaving the Santa Maria's home immersed in a different psychosphere. Christ had been invited back into that family.
Dear friends, this chapter is truly so empowering. Why do we say that? We say that because the spirit of Manuel Filomeno de Miranda and of Dr. Bezerra de Menezes offer to us a loving tool that is at all of our disposal, and it's a tool that Jesus himself made use of while he was incarnated here on earth. So since Jesus Christ is our master and guide, let us take this chapter to heart, allow it to nourish our souls, and considering following his steps. So what is the empowering tool that was offered to us tonight? The empowering tool that was offered to us is called God at Home. And what does that mean? As we saw with Coronel Sombrera and Coronel Santamarias and their teams meeting, the God at Home is when we gather in our home with or without the presence of our loved ones at a given time, at the same time every week, and the same designated day every week, to read a passage of a positive, enlightening book that can nourish our souls. In the case of Coronel Sombrera and the Santa Marias in the chapter discussed tonight, they picked the Gospel according to Spiritism for their God at Home. So what they have done, as we heard tonight, was they opened the meeting at a given time. They chose 8 p.m. as their designated time, and they opened the meeting at that time with a heartfelt prayer, followed by a reading from the Gospel according to Spiritism. The Gospel according to Spiritism is the same Gospel that we are used to, which contains the teachings of our beloved Master, but those teachings are explained to us through the loving hearts of the illuminated minds that worked with the mediums at Kardec's times to inspire us, to enlighten us, and to bring us back to the feelings of the early Christians, those who were truly in contact with Christ's teachings and allowed those teachings to permeate their souls. So the Gospel according to Spiritism, as we saw in this chapter tonight, contains comments from these illuminated minds from the perspective of spirituality, looking at the teachings from the perspective also of immortality, looking at us as immortal spirits. The chapter that they discussed in the study that was described in the chapter tonight is entitled Selfishness, and the mentors during the discussion of the chapter explained to us that we may act in selfish ways when we create attachments to those that we love by feeling as though they belong to us and they shall behave in a certain way and they shall follow our standards and they shall make the choices that we would like. Those attachments that are focused on the feeling of self and focused on our needs only are a result of pride and selfishness. So in the study reported in the chapter tonight, we are invited to meditate upon what circumstances in our lives may we act in this way, in this certain possessive way, and how we may be able to rid ourselves of these habits that we may carry from the past. Again, when we reflect upon the chapter tonight, we notice that Cornel Santa Maria, in self-reflection, noticed that he himself acted in selfish ways. So it's beautiful to realize, dear friends, that when we engage in a positive reading followed by self-reflection and prayer, we may truly be able to transform ourselves, because we may be able to raise our awareness to the progress that we have already made as spirits and to the areas in which we can still progress, we can still better ourselves. Isn't it beautiful, dear friends, to know that we are indeed a work in progress and that we shall better ourselves as much as we can with the tools that we have, and that Spiritism grants us so much because now we believe in immortality and we believe in our ability to change, but we know why. We have the blessing of reasoned faith, and it is this very blessing of reasoned faith that is awakening the Santa Marias to a new reality and is going to propel the healing of Esther to take place more rapidly, because now we understand that suffering in the present moment is a result of our own actions that were taken in the past. That in God's universe there are no injustices and no victims. That suffering is a tool that our consciousness calls for in order to awaken us to take responsibility for ourselves. So let us practice enlightening ourselves, our minds, our souls, nourishing ourselves every day by reading a positive message or listening to positive messages at Kardec Radio like we are doing now, in order to boost our spiritual potentials and our spirit abilities to progress as much as possible regarding our spiritual developmental milestones. So let us reflect this week, dear friends, upon what areas may we want to develop ourselves more, and let us consider using the tool of the God at home to bring light to our homes and bring light to the loving temple of our very own hearts as immortal spirits that we are. Let us learn to nourish our souls today and always, and in gratitude for these many opportunities to nourish our souls, let us say a beautiful prayer together with the mentors of Kardec Radio, with you, dear listeners, and with all our mentors and guardian angels that are now surrounding us. Thank you, dear God, for your loving presence, for constantly showering us with unconditional love. Allow us, beloved Father, to have eyes that see your abundant love for us and ears to hear your loving messages throughout the day. In nature, we find your messages of love every day, through the sun that shines, through the rain that refreshes, through the fruits that blossom. Allow us, dear God, to create the opportunities that are necessary for us to learn to also nourish our souls and recognize your presence within the depths of our very own hearts. Give us the courage to have designated times of prayer, meditation, and self-reflection inbuilt within our routine so that we boost our potentialities in this reincarnation and make this reincarnation a loving and useful opportunity, not only for ourselves, but for everyone around us. Let us remind ourselves that we are not victims, but rather we are loved and beloved children of God. Let us affirm to ourselves every day that we are beloved children of God, and let us always open our hearts to feel your presence and your blessings. So be it. And until we meet again, dear friends, for another study session, we wish you many, many blessings, and we wish that you be surrounded by the unconditional love of our dear Father God. So be it.